Alright guys, so finally the rents in Lehigh Acres, Florida are starting to drop. As we know, the stock market has plateaued now for quite a little bit, so we know there's not a lot of growth going in regardless. We also know that the interest rates are ridiculously high right now, and that a lot of the people that were buying these investment duplexes in Lehigh Acres were people that were coming down from New York, thought they were investors because they got a loan, purchased a home as an investment with somebody else's money, thinking that they were going to rent these properties out for ridiculous numbers. And now those numbers are starting to come down significantly, which means that very soon a lot of them will probably end up going into foreclosure, or in the very least, not being able to find tenants for their newfound debt. You wouldn't believe how many people actually bought duplexes and houses in Lehigh Acres thinking that they were going to rent them out for ridiculous price tags. And now, not only are the rents going down as we're about to see on today's video, but also insurance rates have grown tremendously in Florida, meaning that a lot of people did some math that they thought would work out for the long run, and now they're finding out that there are troubles, which means that we're going to see an end to the massive explosion of single-family home construction and duplexes in Lehigh Acres, Florida. And as we know, despite nearly 200,000 people living in Lehigh Acres, a lot of people that live in Lehigh Acres actually have a faux mas address because Lehigh Acres is unincorporated, and now we've hit a roadblock. Back in 2007-2008, Lehigh Acres was actually known as the foreclosure capital of the United States, where homes dropped 80% off their peak values, leaving a lot of people underwater going into foreclosure. And Lehigh was a no man's zone, a place you just didn't even go to. Just about every single home that became vacant after a foreclosure would then have the entire appliances, electrical system, and even the plumbing ripped out and sold for scrap metal. This prompted the then governor of Florida to instill new laws that prevented the sales of copper coils for scrap metal. These laws are still present today in the state of Florida. You do not realize, if you've recently moved to the Fort Myers area, how scary this place becomes. Once you enter a real recession like we did in 2007-2008, many of the people that were from out of state simply fled, leaving behind the skeletons of their previous lives, which were devoured by the vultures down here. It really does become a hectic, scary, and dangerous place once people start losing their homes. During that recession, only Las Vegas, Nevada had more foreclosures than Lehigh Acres, followed by Golden Gate Estates outside of Naples, Florida. This is a very vulnerable market, and a lot of people that moved down here believed that there would be stability in their investment. Little did they know the warnings that I have been telling you guys, like there's no access to city water, everybody's on well. There's no access to city sewage, everybody is on a septic tank. A dependency on tourism, which can be shut down by environmental issues like the red tide or hurricanes, which have become a little persistent in the last few years. I lived in Lehigh Acres for 1 year to be close to my family, and it was the most miserable economical time period of my life. There is literally nowhere to extract a dollar from this miserable, barren economical wasteland. Everything is single-family home, residential. Everybody commutes to Naples or Fort Myers. There's no real economy in Lehigh Acres. It's a bedroom community lacking infrastructure like access to basic fast-speed internet. Despite the fact having 200,000 people, it is still unincorporated. These are just some of the mounting problems that make life in Lehigh Acres completely unbearable. Before living in Lehigh Acres, I lived in Naples and Alabama, where cost of living was better, cost of housing was more comparable to the incomes. This is a place where the odds are highly stacked against you. Despite that, they've built more homes here in Lehigh Acres than anywhere else in Southwest Florida. Despite that, the grid pattern could easily accommodate another 300,000 people, as it is mostly still undeveloped. It's a vast piece of land that someday could be a residential nightmare, similar to the grid pattern of Hialeah, Florida. And as always, we are not revenue insulting like other YouTube creators. Let me give you guys some real information that's not exaggerated. Right now, you can find a 3-2 in Lehigh Acres for $1,600. For rent signs were popping up everywhere in Lehigh Acres. 2 years ago, that was almost impossible to find. They could have asked as much as $22 for that rental and somebody would have had to pay it. But laws like SB 1718 have depopulated places like Lehigh Acres. Even before SB 1718, about a 17% decline in permits, showing that already the area was not growing as fast as previously. It's no surprise since after 1718, the implementation of the anti-immigrant laws by the state governor Ron DeSantis, we saw that many for rent signs popped up in previously Hispanic communities. But despite people complaining of unobtainably high rental values, these properties in bad neighborhoods are still vacant and people simply are afraid to move into these cheaper rents that opened up. This drop in rents isn't happening in Naples or along the beaches of Fort Myers. It's mostly pertaining to areas like Lehigh Acres that are poor. Well, that's really where the crunch is hitting. And a while back, we could flip the script and say that the crunch was at the bottom. It was more difficult for finding affordability. But today, affordability is opening up in Southwest Florida, but there's nobody there wanting to rent these properties. A 3-bedroom, 2-bath, single-family home in Lehigh Acres can now be found for about $1,800. These homes were about $2,400 just a year ago. While in the worst parts of the inner city in Fort Myers, you can actually rent a house right now for $1,250. They actually even built duplexes in Fort Myers in inner city neighborhoods like off of Canal Street, really scary area, and they're still trying to get over $2,100 a month for these. While these duplexes are closer to work and they have access to city sewage instead of a septic tank, it's still questionable who's going to pay $2,200 a month to live in a dangerous neighborhood of Fort Myers. I mean, crap, you can rent an entire 3-bedroom, 2-bath in a nice part of Lehigh for less than $2,000 a month right now. I actually drove past that house every single day when I lived in Lehigh, and I know it's a good area. When I left Lehigh Acres about a year ago, there were simply no rents in that price range unless you ended up in the notorious triangle, which is what we're looking at here, an area that is nothing but duplexes packed on top of each other, constant car break-ins, constant gang rivalries, and of course, Lehigh Acres is famous for their home invasion robberies. That happen not in the night while you sleep, but in the daytime while you're gone working, because everybody here has a long commute. It empties out at 6 a.m. and it doesn't fill back up till 8 or 9 o'clock at night, which means that most of the daytime, these neighborhoods are completely vacant. Only the workers in construction were present building houses here, and now that they're mostly gone, these neighborhoods are complete ghost towns, perfect for catching you off guard while you're working and breaking into your house. The famous Lehigh Acres home invasion robbery. And just figure, in a place that doesn't have any industry at all it has is a complex of duplexes for miles and miles. Where else could somebody get any money around here other than doing a home invasion robbery? I've traveled all over the United States, and to find an area that's rural and mostly it's just duplexes and everybody commutes to another nearby city because there's nothing there, quite literally doesn't exist anywhere in the United States, let alone the fact that when I was living in Lehigh, we started to spend over $200 a week to get to Naples to work when the gas prices went up. It's completely unobtainable. The math doesn't add up, and even these rent prices are almost impossible for the working person when you consider the commute they have to go through to find a job. I'm not saying we're going back to a 2007-2008 type recession. Today, the impact is spread out thinly. The foreclosures will be spread out. It'll be a long, drawn-out process, not like before where everything happens suddenly. You wouldn't believe how many people I've discouraged from making these types of investments. They thought that they were going to buy a duplex in Lehigh and every year jack up the rent. And now we're at the point where the complete opposite is happening. Not only are rents more available, more affordable, but also increasing insurance costs. A lot of these so-called self-proclaimed investors, I literally have met people who tell me that their personal financial advice on how they're investing is coming from a YouTuber. And I've told them, I'm a YouTuber, but I've actually lived down here. Where does your YouTuber live? Oh, they live in Texas or they live in some other state. And I'm like, you're getting your financial advice on YouTube from somebody who doesn't even live down here. That's how you're investing. You're talking people who come from New York and they've never stepped foot in Lehigh Acres. And before they put 1 foot on the ground, they've already purchased an investment property sight unseen. This is completely stupid money. And if it was their own money, well, that's their own personal decision. Unfortunately, many of them are doing it with the bank's money. And that's exactly what started to happen back in 2007, 2008. Now, levels of corruption were present back then with developers. That was absolutely insane. Back then, the builder would approach people and offer you $50,000 cash if you bought a particular model that they had a contract to build. It was a kickback scam. And while frauds and scams go in and out of style and fashion, that is still present to a smaller degree in Lehigh Acres, where somebody will actually pay you cash if you buy a particular model. Now, a lot of people today are more hesitant than back then to destroy their credit. Before Obama got rid of the wet foot, dry foot law, people would come from Cuba and they would engage in all types of economic crimes because they didn't care about their credit. They weren't familiar with the American economic system. Somebody just approached them and said, hey, I'll give you $50,000 if you buy a house. And of course, they would say yes, not aware that they probably couldn't keep up the mortgage payment. And they were even told, hey, as long as you make 1 or 2 mortgage payments just to make it seem like you actually legitly bought the house. Many people actually bought houses they had no intentions of even living in. Some of them kept the houses and lived in them and tried to rent them until they lost them. Others simply never even stepped foot once in the house that they bought. They just took $50,000 to, on paper, buy a house they had absolutely no intentions to even live in. And while I don't think this is happening at the same scale as it was back then, it is definitely still happening in Lehigh Acres to a small degree. But the real aggravating factor here is people who came from New York, bought duplexes with realtors that had absolutely no knowledge of the area, which means they couldn't even advise their client on which were the best investments to make. What areas do not flood, what areas are more likely to go to crap when there's a recession. These people had absolutely no knowledge of the area. They were simply scammed into thinking, because of their YouTube become a real estate investor thing that was going on for a while there, that they could too become an investor, buy properties in Florida, rent them out, be a slumlord. And now they're finding out there's nobody to rent these houses and the overhead is starting to rise dramatically. But other areas like Naples, Florida, the madness continues. In Imperial Golf Course, you can actually rent a house for $10,000 a month. Of course, the person buying or renting in Naples is a completely different economical class. Here, you're talking the wealthiest people, and for them, it makes more sense to rent a house 3 or 4 months of the year, regardless of the cost, than it does to actually keep track of a house in Florida. These are ultra wealthy people, and they can actually afford to rent a house for $10,000 a month. That may not make a lot of sense to me and you, but when you consider the cost of buying and maintaining a home in Florida, just a snowbird, just the hassle alone may not be worth it. On top of that, you got real estate fees, and many times when people buy homes to snowbird in Florida, they're not sure if they're going to be able to use it in the following year due to red tides, hurricanes, and other complications we've been having within the tourism industry, which means it doesn't really make sense for people to buy a snowbirding home in Florida like it used to. It's much better for them to pay $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a month to rent the home for the months they're actually going to occupy it, and not have to deal with the year-round hassle of having to maintain, care for a house in Florida. Again, to me and you, that may not make a lot of sense, but when you take the cost of home ownership in play, it makes a lot of sense not only for the person that's renting the property to get those huge numbers, it also makes sense for the person renting it not having to go through the troubles of buying a home in Florida simply to snowbird. Let alone the fact that now the home is only occupied through a brief period of the year, which means that the property isn't being depleted at the same rate if they would rent to somebody year-round. One of the reasons finding a rental for year-round became difficult in Naples was simply the fact that it didn't make sense for somebody to rent a property to somebody year-round and have to deal with them destroying the property throughout the year, when you could just rent it to an elderly couple for a few months at the end of the year for an exorbitantly high rate, make as much money as if the house was occupied through the whole year. They can use the property during the summer. They have less maintenance they have to worry about, less wear and tear. It's an all-around win for everybody involved. Except for, of course, the person who has to rent a house in Naples year-round because they live there. It really only hurts the person that lives in Naples year-round, but there's no incentive. That means that some of these houses are actually empty most of the year, and they're not going to be touched by the locals. These properties are exclusively for people snowbirding just for a few months during the winter. This isn't a middle-class recession. The poor and the rich is what we have today. And while in Lehigh Acres, the poor are going to really struggle, the rich are going to continue with their beautiful beachside lifestyles. During the time of the year, it's actually pleasant to be in Florida. You have a huger divide today between the poor and the rich. So while in Lehigh Acres, there's a crisis, along the beaches of Naples, everything's going to continue about the same, at least for now. There's more than one YouTube realtor that will tell you right now that they live in Naples and most of their customers are buying these houses cash. When you buy cash, it doesn't matter what the economy does because you don't have a mortgage attached to it. In fact, you don't even have to insure the property if you don't want to, if you own it outright. Unless it's like within an HOA that requires it. When I had my house paid off, I never had homeowners insurance on it because it just didn't make sense. It wasn't required. But if you have a mortgage, the bank will definitely require that that property is properly insured. So while in places like Lehigh Acres, rents are on the decrease, in Naples, Florida, a $45,000 a month rental will probably have no issues finding somebody to rent it. Because again, if you consider property taxes, insurance, costs of maintenance, it just doesn't add up. The hassles of home ownership don't make sense to somebody snowbirding in Florida, and they'll easily, happily pay $120,000 to be down here for 3 to 4 months. So right now, different sectors of the real estate market, depending by price point, are going to act in different ways. And what we're seeing is the bottom of the market having more volume, more availability, but very few tenants. While the wealthy and the more expensive investments, people who bought homes cash, don't have to worry about insurance, don't have to worry about mortgage rates, they're going to be all right. It's going to be those that really made the mistakes of thinking they were YouTube investor type people. They're going to find out that very soon they're going to be foreclosure type YouTube people. In the real estate world, you may think you're an investor because you have $500,000. Here comes somebody with $20 million and they can outcompete you. So it's incredible to think that somebody could think that with a $50,000 down payment, they could have a competitive edge on somebody who has millions of dollars at their disposal. You're not an investor, you're a complete moron. And I hope your life sucks, your wife divorces you, and you move back to New York with your dog in the back of your Subaru. And I know that sounds harsh, but that's just how much hate I have in my heart for you. Now, unless you're subscribed to my channel, in which case I'll have to put up with you, and quite frankly, you're going to have to put up with me as well. This is a mutual benefit relationship here. We really don't have a choice. Just kidding. I love you all. Thank you for being part of our channel, and I hope the information that I'm bringing to you doesn't sound like the revenue insulting YouTubers that are out there. I'm giving you real, genuine information from the ground in Florida. And even though my wife is a realtor to my complete distaste, I don't really have a choice in what she does for a living, but that's what she does for a living. Even though she does that, I've had no problems telling you guys the truth about what happens in Florida. And let me tell you, it's been difficult for her to make sales. In fact, she still hasn't made any sales. I'm pretty sure if I was drawing up beautiful sunset pictures for you guys every day, she would be making sales, which is really unfortunate how easy it is to give people information and then control their actions based off that information. It's kind of disturbing because I'm sure if I was pushing out there a different narrative, then we would in fact be having sales for her. It seems like people only want to buy into what they want to hear, and if you're not telling them what they want to hear, they simply don't want to buy. It's like an old grotesque Cuban saying, You want them to do it to you so you can say that it hurts. Ironically, despite the fact that we have the access to the real estate information that's accurate and has proven to be one of the best sources on the internet for Florida real estate investing, somehow we're not professional enough to handle your sale, but we are professional enough for you to get the information off of us and then use somebody else who has absolutely no idea what the crap they're looking at. That makes freaking perfect sense. Hey, the stupidity that's out there has no boundaries. People just want to buy into celebrity YouTubeism, and they'll actually buy a house from a guy that has a YouTube channel who moved here from New York 2 years ago, knows nothing about the regulations, laws, environment, anything that's as far as a liability or a hazard to the property you're buying. They're completely unfamiliar with the landscape of this place, yet that's what the crap people want because they're blindsided by what they want to hear, not what they need to hear. There's one thing I've watched from my wife becoming a realtor in Florida. It's been that a realtor's job is just to be what I would call, a transaction broker. Just here's a house, here's a buyer, do the paperwork. Really, that's the basic implementation of what a realtor is. A realtor is not a financial advisor, and frankly, neither is a YouTuber. This is just my personal opinion, but I hope you guys like it. Checking out from beautiful Florida.